Welcome, everybody, to the Voice of Supply Chain. I am Katherine McCleery, your host of the show. I'm so excited for this one. We have an incredible guest. And by the way, if you haven't seen the logo on the banner here, we are sponsored by ISN New Jersey. And the purpose of this show is to tell personal stories of people in supply chain and procurement doing extraordinary things. Today's guest is so extraordinary, and I am excited to bring him on. Um, let's just go ahead and do it. We'll get right into it. Tom Mills,
Hey,
Procurement
Catherine.
Protagonist, welcome to the show.
What an introduction. Thank you.
I skipped all of your professional accolades and just went straight to who you are now. Hope that's okay.
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. There'd be a long list of accolades, not because of accolades, but just through the length of time I've been doing procurement. So,
And that is something we're going to talk about because I noticed as I was looking through your LinkedIn profile, you went right into buying, whereas most people, I feel like, have a journey that gets them, you know, in and around procurement. So we'll get there, but that's one interesting thing I noticed
yeah,
about you that is quite uncommon, I think. Um, I want to just quickly note, though, that as I've been following you and reading your content over the years, and looking at where you've come in the last few years, I don't know what your official mission is, but what I've read is that you're trying to simplify procurement and help people get ahead, people that are joining the profession get ahead. So, real quickly, tell me, expand on that before we jump into things.
yeah. So, just touching on the point around, I started my career in buying and direct purchasing roles, and I made the transition to procurement around about 12, 13 years ago now. And to be honest, that transition was really hard, and I realized that there was a heck of a lot of a jump between working in a direct buying versus an indirect world. And actually, to be really honest, and we might get onto it when we talk about mental health impacts later, I really struggled with it for a while and I struggled to find resources to help me. So, my mission and the reason I've gone big on creating content on LinkedIn is to actually help people who may be in a similar situation to the one that I faced 12 or 13 years ago. When I was in that situation, I struggled to find people who could simplify procurement, who could bring it to life, who I could actually feel like they understood some of the more challenging aspects of stakeholder relationships, etc. So there's a lot of training out there, there's a lot of qualifications, and sometimes expensive courses around the technical skills, but there's a dearth or a lack of actual training around the soft skills and the emotional intelligence. And it's that I want to bring to life, and it's that hopefully comes through in my content.
It does. I can say for sure, I'm not technically in procurement or supply chain professionally. I'm a marketer. However, I have been embedded in these industries, and I learn so much as somebody who's not even in it, just from reading your newsletters, and it helps me stay grounded and in tune with what's going on in the procurement world. Um, and before we actually get into the real questions here, I want to call out one thing for viewers that have questions, comments. Please put them in the chat as you're watching on LinkedIn, and I can see them coming through. Tom, I don't know if you can, but we'll
Yes,
be
I
sure
can. Yeah.
to. Great, we'll be sure to address all of it. And I just want to say hi to Dennis, Atif, Pat, Kasia. Welcome, you guys. Thanks for tuning in, and hopefully, we'll see some more people roll through. My first question is really, it's super simple, but I think it helps people kind of get to the meat and the essence of who you are. So, and you guys, Tom didn't know I was going to ask this. He's not prepared for this.
Here goes. I'm
Um,
getting nervous now.
describe yourself in 3 words.
Oh my goodness.
And it doesn't have to be a sentence. It could just be 3 descriptors of who is Tom.
Passionate, obsessive, I will explain that word, and creative.
Those are great. Sorry for putting you on the spot. When you asked me 5 minutes ago if there was anything that you weren't expecting, I didn't think of that. So sorry about it. But that was great. So passionate, obsessive, and creative.
Yeah. Can I explain the obsessive one? Because I think that has
Please.
both negative and positive connotations, and I'm very self-aware of it. So when I do something, whatever I go to do, I don't go in half measures. So we talked just before we came on air about my LinkedIn. You'll notice I don't ever skip a day from posting. And actually, the growth on LinkedIn is due to the fact that once I go all in on something, I don't stop. And that's not just applied to my professional life or my professional career. I'm obsessive about things like I play fantasy football a lot. And that for me, I'm obsessed with the analytics. I listen to podcasts. When I do something, I don't go in it with half measures. Now, that can be positive from the fact that, it obviously leads to achievement, accomplishment, and success, but it can also lead to burnout. And sometimes I just almost have to take a step back and say, actually, Tom, just be aware that you can't be obsessive about everything without an impact in terms of your battery. And so I think I'm aware of it, and I just need to sometimes make sure that it's contained.
Um, I relate wholeheartedly to that. Um, my obsessiveness with work and whatever um, dessert that I'm cooking at home that I need to perfect. I feel that deeply.
Yeah.
Um, and you just mentioned your fantasy football team. So
Yes.
we're speaking about soccer
We're
for our
talking soccer,
US
yeah.
people,
Yeah, yeah.
football for literally everyone else in the world. Um, who's your team?
Well, so I'm a Man United supporter in real life. We're not having a great time of it since Alex Ferguson retired. So actually, the fantasy football is a great distraction from the performance of the actual team that I support. The great thing with fantasy football is that you can be agnostic of teams that you support, and you can bring in players from even teams that I don't like as much, like Manchester City and Liverpool, because it's all about picking the players that are performing. And actually, I do recognise with fantasy football that there's a lot of analytics within it, which I really enjoy. I've always enjoyed analytics. I've always loved studying algorithms, which is again part of the reason for my love of LinkedIn. I have always loved studying things like heat maps and trends, and it's that I apply in my fantasy football. So I don't want to geek out too much on it because I'm sure there's lots of people who don't really care for fantasy football, but I use that as an example of whereby when I choose to do something, I go all in, if that makes sense.
And do you have like a league that you're a part of, like a group of
Yeah,
people?
so there's two ways that I play it. I've got a league with effectively a family and friends league whereby we play a draft format where you play each other in head fixtures each week. That's deeply competitive, and I have a big rivalry with my younger brother Zand, who I have to say is usually better than me. So that's a struggle. Um, and
Well,
then
my follow-up on that is what's your record? How many times have you won your league?
So I think probably two times in the last 5 years. So I'm usually in the top two. To win the league, you've got to beat me, definitely. I do take it very seriously. So um, I think I'd like to think I'm pretty good, but I also play in the actual kind of global version where there's about 11 million players, and that's all about ranking. So I always try to get in the top maybe top 50k in terms of the actual end of season ranking. And again, that's something that I'm very obsessed about. So Yeah.
Well, for those just joining, I see a few more people saying hi. Larry, hello.
Yeah, great
Maya,
to see Larry in the chat.
yeah, Brian and Michelle, thank you for joining us. You thought you were gonna come on a supply chain podcast, and it's actually a fantasy football
Yes, it
podcast.
is. Yes.
Uh, well, what I'm picking up on is a theme of excellence in your life and the things that you choose to do. And so let's unpack that. Let's go back to your childhood. You grew up in Essex.
Yes.
You are the second youngest of 5, right?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
tell me about your early life.
So I yeah, it was quite a large family by modern standards. I feel that that may be a root of some of my competitiveness in terms of I've always been as a younger sibling always looking to um compete and to I guess with 5 people grabbing the attention of the parents, that's going to have an impact. Maybe I'm going into too much psychoanalysis here, but
No,
I
let's do
think it's
it.
a fact. Yeah. We grew up, in a really nice area in the UK, but um, we had one teacher's salary coming in, so effectively, I'm not going to plead poverty because I think that's the wrong thing to do, given lots of people in the world with lots of struggles. But it was definitely an environment whereby we had to think very carefully about how we spent our money. So a lot of the times it was hand-me-down clothes. We weren't able to get perhaps um, the latest trainers or sneakers, as you call them, Catherine, because we couldn't afford it. And actually, there was a lot of paper rounds to make up um, for to get some spare cash. And I do distinctly remember one holiday we went to in England, where at the start of it, my father brought out a £50 note and said, "Right, this is all we've got for this week." Now, I don't know whether that memory is actually really exaggerated through time, but in my mind, I've always been very aware of the importance of saving and making sure that your money lasts and making sure that you're very careful about your decisions. And I'd like to think, and I know there's an obvious strand here in terms of that's
Yeah.
perhaps informed my um, procurement protagonism as I have gone into my career later in life. But had a wonderful childhood, and I don't want to plead poverty. My point is, though, that we had a situation where we definitely had to think carefully about money, and I think that that's been an element. And then definitely the growing up with uh, older siblings, particularly my older brothers. They're all academically brilliant, and there was almost that competitiveness of firstly the almost the pressure to succeed in terms of following them in terms of what they achieve, but also I guess maybe underlying the kind of attention grabbing element of competitiveness as well.
Again, speaking my language, I'm the youngest of 4, and all of my siblings are brilliant, either engineers or executives. And I
Yeah,
was always just trying to keep up.
yeah,
Um, Absolutely had hand-me-downs at every step of the way. Um, but what I think is so interesting, and I don't know that I've interviewed someone in all of my career that has such a close and, like, distinct thread from childhood to career, going from always being cognizant of cost savings and budget and having that instilled in you to now having a career in procurement. Um, and I have seen some content that you've posted saying cost savings isn't everything. What what would you tell maybe your younger self, or maybe your dad who is the budgeter of the family now as a procurement professional? Would that message change? Or, what would
yeah.
you tell him?
That's really interesting, actually, because I think, in fairness, my journey into that narrative around cost savings aren't everything is something that's actually evolved in my adult life, to be honest. Because one of the advantages of transitioning from a buying environment through to being head of purchasing and then to being head of procurement is that you realize that there's a very different thing that's important to the stakeholders when you're in indirect procurement space than when you're in direct buying. So, or in a purchasing environment. So I think in reality, that transition has been a direct result of the corporate environments that I've grown grown up in my adult life. Back to your question though, in terms of what would I kind of tell my younger self, I think, listen, money is just a really small part of happiness, and we're going to get really onto a really big theme here, but I think I look back at my childhood and I think about all the amazing experiences we had despite not having a great deal of money around things like our holidays. We may have all been 7 of us in a caravan, but we had amazing times. Or Christmas was just so special. And so I can see now that actually, while budgeting might be a factor, there's so much more value in life than what you can buy, if that makes sense.
Yeah, the theme of value
Yeah.
definitely corresponds in both topics. Um, so we spoke briefly about you going straight into buying from university, but let's step back a couple years and talk about what you studied in university, because
Yeah.
this is like the best, I think, fun fact about you. So
Okay.
share with everyone what you were first
Yeah.
focused on in school.
Well, whenever I tell people this, I think they think I'm joking, but I had a serious plan to be a weatherman. So, just to be really clear, I was very interested in meteorology as a child. Where that stemmed from was because we're talking about childhood. Anyone who lives in the UK will remember the Great Storm of 1987. I was awake all night, and while most people were probably scared, there was huge disruption. I was absolutely enthralled by the power of the weather. And from that night onwards, I had an absolute fascination with extreme weather events. And I used to watch the news just so that I could get to the weather forecast at the end. I used to love the weather forecast, and I used to practice delivering the weather forecast in my home. That's how much I was into it. So I actually studied geography at university, following the strand of being interested in meteorology throughout my secondary school. And the aim was, or the goal was, that I would then do a master's in physics, which would then lead me to becoming a meteorologist. But just to be very specific, I didn't want to be the researcher. I wanted to be the presenter.
Yeah.
So,
And I wonder, are most presenters, do they have physics as part of their
um,
expertise? Is
it depends, because I know that obviously in terms of weather presenting, it's not always people who have necessarily studied it from a point of view of the meteorological aspect, but a lot of the weathermen or women that I was following when I was younger were actually on the BBC, and at the time there was a requirement for that meteorology behind it. So I actually I actually did do a lot of research in terms of what I needed to do to get to that stage. And I do sometimes think about it and think that would have been my alternative career. The other thing that I quite like is I like debating, I like presenting, I like giving speeches. So the element of being on TV, while it would have been perhaps nerve-wracking, I think I'd have also enjoyed. That's where I get a lot of my energy. So yeah, it didn't happen. I went into procurement in the end.
Well, but now you've come for full circle, because you do speak at events and you're
Yeah,
on the podcast right now. You've been on many podcasts. You
yeah,
have a YouTube channel, right?
yeah. Yeah, I actually enjoy writing as well, Catherine. So you'll notice, obviously, you mentioned my newsletter that I write, but I've actually really enjoyed the written aspect as well of what I've been able to do. And I mentioned in my 3 words the creative. I didn't actually think I was creative until maybe the last few years, but I've realized that there's quite a lot of creativity lot that I've been able to unlock through the content that I've created. So
Yeah, and I noticed that in, some of your work history, you were no, I'm gonna get it wrong, but, there was, like, category management for marketing,
yes, I did.
something like that?
Yeah, so I was for a short while at the co-op, I was a range strategy manager. So effectively that what I meant was I was almost the bridge between the buying teams and the marketing team. And actually my role there was to we were at the time building new store formats for co-op, and based on the demographics of where people lived, I was having to advise on the best ranges to be able to suit the needs of the customers. The interesting thing about that was you had the kind of playoff between the buyers who wanted to get the high margin products in, but also being able to deliver the customer offer that would deliver sales. So it was it was a bit of a hybrid, to be honest, marketing buying role. Really challenging role, but I learned a heck of a lot about. Again, I mentioned earlier about analytics and understanding the impact of consumer trends, and actually the that was the first role that I had where I truly had to influence. So I had to influence the buyers to do the right thing by the customers, knowing that I had no direct say on the decisions that they made, if that makes sense.
Yes, and what an incredible and interesting, Venn diagram for a
Yeah.
role to
Yes.
be so close to marketing, influencing procurement and buying.
Yeah.
I haven't met well, there's maybe Sarah Scudder is probably the only other person that I've known that has such a close crossover starting in category management for marketing and then going into marketing.
Yes.
Um, so cool. And I also noticed, I made note for myself, one of your positions as a buyer in the few years of buying that you did before you went into leadership position, one of your categories was wine and spirits. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, so specifically, it was fortified wine and spirits. So I'm not a, I think you have to have specific qualifications to become a wine buyer. So I wasn't that. But yeah, I was spirits buyer and fortified wine, so port, sherry. I, it was brilliant for samples. And I tell you what, I did quite a lot of whiskey tours in Scotland as well. So yeah,
You
incredible
know, it
role.
comes with the job, right?
Yeah, exactly.
You gotta do your homework.
Exactly, that's exactly it. And for a while, actually, I really got a taste for whiskey. So single malt whiskey, it was amazing. But actually, really interesting dynamic from a point of view of the category, because you had quite major players like obviously Diageo owns a massive market share with Bailey's, Gordon, Smirnoff, Bell's whiskey that they own. But then you also had the development of own label products. So at the time, the co-op did a really brilliant range of own label ports, which are actually really well recognized within the market. So it's that intersect between dealing with the really big branded suppliers and negotiating, let's face it, of really tight margins, and then making sure that you had the right range strategy to be able to complement that by bringing in higher margin products, but customer facing products that would kind of create a point of difference. It was a hugely there's a big focus. It was amazing how much proportion of wine or spirits is sold at Christmas. So it was very much you go through most of the year and there wouldn't be much focus, but all of a sudden, when it came to the promotional plans for your Christmas ranging, there'd be all sorts of focus on what I was doing. So yeah, I really enjoyed it, and I have to tell you, Catherine, I I got so many samples. Yeah, it probably wasn't very healthy for me at the time, but
Well, that's a perk that I,
yeah,
um, hope and pray for someday
yeah,
in my job.
yeah, yeah.
Okay,
It was a good role.
so what's your favorite whiskey?
Oh, um, I'm gonna say Isle of Jura, or maybe, and this will maybe surprise people, Lefroy. which is a very peaty, kind of harsh whiskey, but it's just
Hmm.
so distinctive. And I, for both of those, I have been on the distillery tours, so that's probably influenced me. But when you just, you can almost, this is going to sound really grandiose, but you can almost taste where it's from. Just unbelievable. So yeah, there you go. I've given you two.
Okay. For the audience, if you guys have specific questions about whiskey and distilleries that you must visit, put that in the chat. We'll get to those as we go.
I'm not an expert, by the way. So
Well, maybe you're an expert at buying
yes, yeah, yeah.
those.
Ask me
Yes.
about the margin and yeah, how much percentage goes to actually duty and tax. That might be better. But
Well, yeah. What off the top of your head? What's that
well,
number?
significantly, I'd say probably at the time it was close to 80% actually goes to duty. So not not that far away from cigarettes. So you can see that therefore there's very little that you can do from a point of view of price point margins, etc. And that's got really big in the UK because more and more um, tax has been applied to alcohol, really. And some would argue for good reasons, but yeah, it's huge, really, and that's why
Okay.
ultimately it's so expensive.
Yeah, I was not expecting 80%.
No,
That
yeah, it's
that
crazy.
makes your job tougher, right?
Yeah,
With budget and
yeah, absolutely.
yeah. So as I was looking through your experience, you had a lot of buying positions over the course of, I don't know, a few years, right? And
Yeah,
then you're moving into leadership. And then after that, I just see head of procurement, head of procurement, head of procurement. Tell me about that transition of being an individual contributor and
yeah,
then leading. And sounds like you love it. You like
yeah,
that. You prefer that. Tell me about that.
yeah. There's two things about that transition. So, firstly, the leader from a point of view of I went from being a direct buyer whereby I was in control of my decisions, but effectively I didn't have a team, to then I went to a head of purchasing position at the Hut Group, which is a multi-site online retailer. And there I had a team of six relatively junior purchasing individuals. And I realized that all of the experience that I had from buying and the kind of almost blue chip experience, I loved that element of being able to train and coach a team and develop them. So even though I was in that role for a relatively short period of time, I realized that actually there's huge joy and satisfaction from leaving a legacy in the business of having trained individuals, coaching them, and watching them thrive. So that was my first real taste of leadership. But then the second angle to this is I made the transition from a direct purchasing role to procurement. And when I made that transition, I think if I'm really honest, Catherine, at the time I hadn't realized what a big jump that is, because when you're in procurement, you're no longer directly responsible for the buying decisions that you're making. You are influencing the organization to make the right decisions. Moreover, you're going to be far more focused on value versus cost, and you're responsible for making sure that you negotiate all the nuanced elements of the contracts, the things like the SLAs, making sure that you've got the right indemnities, making sure you've got the right warranties, liabilities, so many more things to think about. And it was that complexity and the jump in terms of influencing that, to be honest, made me think, wow, there's a lot here. And I'll be honest, I struggled with it. I struggled with the jump. I always like a challenge, and I've always wanted to continue to challenge myself in my career. So there's no regret there. But perhaps what I hadn't realized was just how steep that curve is when you make that transition.
I love that you brought that up because I think, as somebody who is learning as an outsider about procurement, I remember really early on wondering what the difference is between buying, slash purchasing and procurement. And some people, maybe outside of procurement, would say, what's the difference? Like, there's no difference. You're just
Yeah,
buying things. Like, so the fact that there is that maybe multiple levels above, um, so many outside factors and variables that somebody in procurement has to consider in order to meet larger objectives. It's not just about buying, right?
no,
So
yeah,
how did you get through that? Was it just repetitive, experience? Did you have a
yeah.
mentor?
So that's a really great question, and what I did was I actually I actually took a step back and thought, okay, what are my core skills that differentiate myself from others in the procurement space? That might seem strange because I know normally you try to blend in and you try to think, oh, well, what's so and so doing? They seem to be having success. But I thought actually, my personal strength and what I enjoy doing is building connection. So, building connection with people within the business. It's the whole reason I went into buying or supply chain role because I love meeting people. And actually, what I realized was if I focus in on my emotional intelligence, my awareness, and getting to understand the stakeholders and get them to enjoy working with me, then the rest of it, the technical skills that I may need to layer on top of that, that's the easy bit. And so I almost went for a kind of 6 month period where I thought, you know what? Yes, this is tough, but I'm going to make sure that I develop some really strong relationships, people who back me, who want to work with me, and that way I can start enjoying it and start feeling like I can have a positive influence. And I'm not saying that no one else around me had that, but I think where I was almost a bit overwhelmed and perhaps felt overpowered by people who had all their MSIP certificates on their wall and all of their technical qualifications, I thought, you know what? I'm going to focus in on what my strengths are. And it's that transition in terms of my mindset that made all the difference. The other thing, you may come on to this, but I just want to mention is that that was probably the first time that I actually hit a mental health crisis. So there was a number of factors at the time. Um, there was the fact that we'd moved house, we'd moved from one side of the country to the other at the same time. My children were young. I felt a lot of pressure in terms of the big decision we'd made to change our location and for me to make that career change. So there was a lot going on, and just back backing my point on emotional intelligence, I also ended up getting some professional help around cognitive behavioral therapy. So that CBT in terms of understanding the signals, making sure that I kept a clear differentiation between work and home life and creating a clear balance helped me to get on top of things before it got overwhelming. And the reason I mention that is I don't think enough people in procurement talk about the strains and the stresses of the job. And back to a point on why I'm on LinkedIn so much is because I thought I want to be one of the first people who starts talking about that openly and sharing. So I know we've probably gone a slightly different angle to your question, but I think it would
That's
be
great.
impossible. It would be impossible to answer
Mm.
the how without explaining that CBT element in terms of the professional help that I got to support me with my mental health as well.
Well, normalizing mental health issues in procurement is my next topic. So you worked in the segue for me
Perfect.
perfectly, and I think it's one of the things that I have appreciated most about getting to know you and reading your content. And I say getting to know you, I mean, we've only spoken a handful of times, right? But I feel like I really know you because of your content and because of your honesty and your openness and your willingness to share what most people in a professional setting, whether it's social media or not, would shy away from or be afraid to talk about. And so I feel empowered when I read your content, I feel empowered like, okay, I've got my own issues and it's okay to talk about it. And work is taking up a majority of people's time every day. It is their life. So
Yes.
talking about your life through a work platform, you guys, it's okay. We can talk about our lives, the real stuff. And
Yeah.
so that's what I've loved about you and your content. And it even comes through in your newsletter. I mentioned in one of my promo posts a couple weeks ago, like it's my favorite to see your subject lines. Um, as a marketer who studies subject lines constantly, um, I get drawn in. I get sucked in immediately. I'm like, oh, he's sassy today. He's on one today. Let's dig in. What's eating at Tom Mills this week? So yeah, I appreciate that about you, and I would love for you to just share a little bit more with our audience about why it's important to you, and maybe if you want to share what you've been through on a deeper
Yeah.
level.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's probably two periods in the last 10 years where I've definitely felt that the anxiety's got to a level whereby I felt like it should be, I needed support and help. But interestingly, since 2020, when I know it's tough for a lot of people for a number of reasons, and not least because we lost that ability to have the connection that we were used to pre-COVID times. Um, at that point, I felt that by coming clean in terms of the challenges that I had been facing, and by journaling and talking about what was going on and being able to write posts and create content, it enabled me to almost kind of, it was therapeutic for me to be able to share that. But also, as I realized it resonated with other people, um, it made me realize that I'm not alone. So that point on connecting with other people and realizing that, okay, if it's not just me that feels this, it's not so much easier when you realize that there's other people that you can support or can support you. So I think interestingly, since coming clean on it, if that's the right word, and since creating content and writing on it, um, I've realized that actually that's a coping mechanism in itself, if that makes sense. Um, I know it's a slightly different point, but the point on the uh, subject lines, I'm so glad you mentioned that, because I actually do. Um, One of the things I've really enjoyed over the last couple of years in creating my own content and trying to grow my newsletter is learning about marketing. So building my own kind of, I guess, online business, I've realized that there's so much power in words. And so I'm very, very deliberate with things like the hook of my LinkedIn post or the subject line of my Wednesday rant series, because I know that the open rate, and I talked about analytics with fantasy football earlier, but I'll just bring it back that the open rate is entirely dictated by, is that subject line going to draw you in? And again, I'm really fascinated by that because it draws on human psychology as well. So the whole thing comes full circle to the influencing part in terms of how do you influence people and how do you hook them in? And that might sound manipulative or cynical, but my point is we all, if we're on social media or writing a newsletter, we want people to read it, right? So why wouldn't you do the best that you can to try and get as many people to engage?
Agreed. And the reasons that you enjoy analytics for your own optimization in your newsletter is why I love marketing. Oh, I love to study human psychology and what makes people tick. And
Yeah,
with marketing, you have to know what makes people tick in order to, garner their attention
yeah,
and all of
yeah.
that. So I love that. And I'm going to pause for just a moment because I don't know if you see in the chat that maybe we froze at some point a few
Yes.
in the last 5 minutes. I'm hoping that everything is back and we're unfrozen. If you guys could
Well,
let
perhaps
us
if anyone
know.
can put in the comments, that would be great.
Okay, got it back. Great.
Oh, that's good. Good to hear, Dennis. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. I also, on the topic of your newsletter, by the way, for everybody that is unaware, Tom writes a newsletter called Procure Bites, and it goes out how many times a week?
Twice a week. So my Monday is a deep insights article, and that's where I try to share something that I know and that I've got perhaps done some research on and a deep opinion on, and I share that, and that's a deep insights article. And then my Wednesday rant series is perhaps a little bit more informal, a bit more sassy, a little bit more something that may have wound me up that week. And to be honest, I just have fun writing that. So twice a week it goes out.
I love the rant series. That's
Yeah.
honestly what I look forward to. I'm like, what's grinding his gears right now? Um, and
I worry that
it's
I might lose people by annoying someone, but I think if I'm just being myself, then and I'm not
you
hurting anyone, then it's fine.
you are being yourself, and I think that sometimes people put on an air on LinkedIn where everything is good, everything is perfect, um, and you have to be positive, and perhaps I think there's a healthy challenge in your rant series, right? Where this is your domain, this is your space. If you've subscribed to this newsletter, you are volunteering to consume this content. And it's a really great space for your rant series. And I know that sometimes it like seeps into your LinkedIn content, which I love. Um, and I'm
Yeah.
sure that the responses are a little different on LinkedIn versus replies to your newsletter.
I think there's an element of, and this is perhaps the downside of social media in terms of, I'm a big music fan and I love The National. Fake Empire is one of my favourite songs of theirs. So giving a plug to The National for a minute. But Fake Empire, in terms of we just create this kind of fake facade of what our lives are like, but in actual fact, that um, under the skin, we're not really showing reality. So what I try to do and what I challenge myself with almost every post I write, unless it's like a truly educational post where I'm just sharing technical elements of procurement, I think, do I actually believe this? Is this how I would talk if I was in a room with someone? And actually, that's what I challenge myself to do on social media. And I also challenge myself not to just give the highlights. So you'll see that the highlights reel is usually full of people who've said, "Oh, I'm overwhelmed by the fact that I've just been promoted or I've just done this, and what a great day we've had presenting on this." And I'm thinking, well, that's great, but how about we also show real life on social media as well? And I'd like to think that I know there's lots of other people who do that as well. So I'm not just making it about something that I do, but it's something that I really challenge myself. And then back to the mental health side of things, I think the more real we can be, the more we can build really positive connection through social media.
Do you think that part of it has resonated well with people in procurement that, um, follow you, engage with you, talk to you, that you maybe get DMs? The the mental health aspect of procurement maybe wasn't,
Yeah,
acknowledged for a long time. What
yeah.
do you think, are the factors or what do you think are the things that are kind of increasing pressure on procurement right now that might affect their mental health?
Yeah, so there's a number of factors, and that's a really great question because I think, firstly, in a positive way, there's been much more of a spotlight on procurement. Since 2020, for example, companies have recognized the importance of really good cost control more than ever. Secondly, there's been more procurement has been more visible in the public domain. You think about the procurement activities that needed to be government-led around things like PPE and making sure the distribution of things like COVID tests and stuff, people recognize the importance of the supply chain and procurement. So I think there's generally more of a recognition of the importance of procurement, but there's more pressure for procurement to do more. And it's one of those functions whereby um, businesses struggle to invest in it. So when I say invest in people or technology to support, because generally the first focus of a business is the customer relationship, the client-facing stuff, and the sales funnels, whereas actually the procurement tends to be very under-resourced. So that's created almost like a kind of a perfect storm of more pressure to do more, but with less resource. And I think that's been a really big factor. The other thing that underpins this, and this isn't just related to procurement, is the fact that we have generally moved to a situation where more people are working from home. There's less connectivity from a point of view of being able to sound off ideas with other people. So I think that in itself can lead to mental health challenges. So I think they've always been there, but I think maybe over the last few years, it's impacted people more than we perhaps realised.
Um, you mentioned the perfect storm.
Yes.
What what do you think would be your forecast for the next couple years in that
Um,
regard?
yeah. Well, the perfect storm was obviously a weather analogy. The forecast is again a weather analogy. So thank you, Catherine. Um, I think that we need to be thinking, and I recently did a post about this, a little bit more carefully about how we're actually going to leverage AI. I think there's been a heck of a lot of hype over the last 18 months around artificial intelligence. You'll see it's part of the sales bump of any procurement tech that's out there in the marketplace. But I think that the future, in terms of enabling procurement to do more and be more effective, is how we use the enhancements around AI to make our jobs more effective, to be doing less of the manual tasks, to be more automated, to be able to think about the structures of our teams, to be able to add the best value. So I think that we're at an inflection point at the moment whereby everyone's aware that AI is out there, but procurement teams aren't quite adapting or knowing how to adapt in terms of their shape and structure to maximize that. And I think data is the game changer for procurement. And those procurement teams that work in businesses that have a really strong foundation of a data strategy, um, underpinned by the advancements that AI can bring, will be more effective. Don't want to get too deep and technical because that's probably firstly well out of my comfort zone, but secondly, I think that we don't have the answers yet. Back to your question on the forecast, I think the forecast is it's going to be difficult. I think the next couple of years are going to be stormy, but I kind of see that ray of sunlight with the importance and the ability of AI to be able to make things easier in the long term.
Yeah, partly cloudy. There's a
Yes,
chance for some clearing, chance for sunshine, um, on
yeah,
the
that's it.
horizon.
How much more weather analogies can we put in?
You know what? If you don't start putting the forecast and weather, in your newsletter somehow,
Yeah, it will be there.
it's a major missed opportunity. So that is my ask, um,
I will do.
for the future. Which brings us to my final question for you, and we've just naturally started to like move into the advice stage of
Yeah,
our conversation. What would you tell, and I thought of this earlier, but I decided to wait. What what would you advise for people that are perhaps in that more tactical buying role, who see for themselves a more strategic role in procurement, but they're perhaps more they're less outgoing and they
yeah,
don't know what the first steps are tactically? They may just need a little bit of guidance. What
yeah.
would you suggest for first steps of, okay, I'm here, I would like to be here, what do I need to do to get there?
Oh, that's a great question. And to be honest, there's probably multiple strands to the answer to that. But the first thing I would do is to challenge your self in terms of I talked earlier about emotional intelligence and soft skills, and think about, okay, what am I doing that's going to truly influence the organization to think about things in a different way? And I think that's that transition from tactical to strategic is, in simple terms, the tactical says we need to go and buy something. Let's let's look at what's out there. In strategic terms, you're thinking, do we need to buy something? Are there alternatives that we need to look at before you go ahead and make those tactical decisions? So the first answer is I would challenge your own mindset and think about, are you empowering yourself to challenge the organization? I think you mentioned something about the kind of people who might be feeling a little bit, you didn't mention the word, but almost introverted as well in terms
Yeah,
of their
sure.
ability to,
It's not their first nature to
it's not their
n-
first nature.
speak out,
Yeah,
and because you mentioned one of the things that you love is relationships and building relationships, seeing people, talking to people. For somebody
yeah,
who that isn't their first nature, how can they
yeah.
start to develop some of that?
Yeah, so I don't think that you should act out of yourself, and I think that back to the point on mental health challenges, that a lot of that is when we're not real. And I think that procurement is the perfect career for someone who is introverted in nature. And the reason I say that is because introverts tend to have a much better ability to be able to listen. They're much, I'm making big generalizations here, and I maybe don't want to annoy anyone, but I think they tend to be people who are more reflective, more self-aware. And I think that therefore people who feel that should recognize that they actually have a super strength, because that introversion enables them to be able to absorb, to be able to influence, to be able to think about how they're going to do things. But then it's okay, well, how do I convert that into impact? And I would say that actually, when you think about making an impact, we have so much at our fingertips now in terms of the technology to be able to communicate in different ways than we perhaps did in a kind of busy office environment 10 or 15 years ago. And I'd say don't underestimate the importance of things like learning how to communicate effectively in your written form. So your emails, your Slack channels, your Teams messages, your PowerPoints, develop your kind of presentation style in a way that makes sure that you can be impactful and have the right influence. I know that might sound really, really specific because you might think, well, hang on a minute, that's kind of what we do day to day. But I think there's not enough focus within business or development of soft skills around the power of communication. People mistake communication as being people who talk a lot. I think there's huge power in communication in terms of those who listen and are able to interpret, and then within a very few words, speak up at the right time. And that's where introverts have an absolute superpower.
Yeah, I think what you're saying makes complete sense. It's building confidence. The starting point is if your written word is clear and full and confident, then that enables your spoken word, which then
Yeah.
can be the next stepping stone to build confidence for an introvert to make next steps that may have been harder to do had they not developed their written communication skills. That's a great piece of advice, probably for anybody,
Good.
anybody, any industry.
Thank you. I'm just going to add one really quick thing, and you just made me think. um, Confidence as well. I think the truly confident person in the room is the person who, when 90% of the room seems to be getting something or agreeing, is confident enough to say, hang on a minute, can someone explain this to me? I don't understand. And that's one thing that I really challenge myself to do, to say, actually, ask questions. And if just because you assume someone else understands things doesn't mean that they do. So the confidence to be able to say, actually, no, I could do with slowing this down is a really important facet. And I think it's an underrated skill within most corporate environments. So introverts or confidence, it actually comes from just recognizing who you are and being okay with what you don't know. So
Great point. Um, Love that. And I know that through a lot of your courses that you're developing, I'm sure you touch on some of that. Do you want to tell us about what you're doing on up leveling people with your resources.
Yeah, so as part of my Procure Bites, I recognise that there's a huge community of people who are interested in the soft skills, and one of the things I mentioned at the start of this show was that we have a lot of access to technical skills and qualifications, but perhaps there's a dearth of or a real lack of soft skills development training courses that are out there to support individuals. So I have developed an online course called Procurement Soft Skills Mastery. So it talks about all of the things that we've discussed today around communication, being an introvert versus an extrovert, presenting. I go into things like interviewing, networking, all of those important things. I've done a lot of reading around the psychology of human behavior, and I apply that to procurement and I add to that the frameworks that I've developed for myself to get through some of the tricky stakeholder situations, and I teach that through my Procurement Soft Skills Mastery course. To be honest as well, Catherine, it's a great opportunity to just meet other people in procurement, and I've developed that community in that way. So I love delivering that course. In fact, I'm delivering it tonight to my next cohort, and they're just such a great group. So
Awesome. Where would somebody find out more about that?
So effectively, if you subscribe to my Procure Bytes, I only do it in I have closed enrollment, if that makes sense. So my next course delivery or enrollment would open in January 2025. It's something I do in my spare time, so I deliver it of an evening in UK Standard Time. But effectively, if they subscribe to my newsletter, then when the enrollment window opens, they will be the first to hear about it.
I love that. And the community aspect of it is probably just an added bonus for people that are trying to build
Yeah,
skills to be able to do it with like-minded folks.
yeah.
Um, Probably makes it that much more effective.
Yeah, and that community aspect is something that I think is hugely undervalued in today's society, but also that global connectivity that I've been able to. In fact, my current cohort, I have people in New Jersey, I have someone in Virginia, I have someone in Nigeria, I have someone in the Middle East, I have people from the UK, and be able to get a group of procurement people from a diverse global regional backgrounds is just a superpower of being in a globally connected world.
Well, I think that's extraordinary. And as promised, you have been an extraordinary guest
Thank you.
for the voice of supply chain. And I want to thank you for coming on and being so open, honest, and sharing your expertise with this audience. I'm sure that once we can figure out the freezing situation and get this recording sent out to everybody, they're going to appreciate every bit of advice that you provided today.
Thank you. It's been great to be on the show, and I really appreciate being on it.
Yeah, great to have you. Reminder, everybody, follow Tom on LinkedIn, Tom Mills. Just you could even Google him. It works. Tom Mills, Procurement Protagonist. That'll take you to all the links for his newsletter, for following him on LinkedIn, and little bits and pieces I've seen where you've presented out and about. You'll find all of that with just an easy search. So again, Tom, thank you for coming on the show, and we'll be sure to send this out. Just a reminder, we'll send this out for everybody in the next day or so.
Thank you.
All right, bye everyone.